I was equal parts honored and daunted by an invitation in the fall of 2024 to lead a series of conversations in The Hague with a small group of Israelis, both Jewish and Palestinian, Jews and Palestinians who continue to share life. The conversation you're about to hear was centered around the matter of intergenerational trauma and healing. In a land in which the traumas of two peoples are terribly, inextricably intertwined. Yochi Fischer is a historian. Loaay Wattad is a lecturer, translator, and editor focused on children's and adolescent literature in Arabic and also in Hebrew. It is a gift to experience the friendship between these two, as well as the struggle. This, and the passionate interaction in the room that follows, holds complexity and nuance and persistent humanity that news from this part of the world rarely conveys. I'm Krista Tippett, and this is On Being. We were convened by the Leer Jerusalem Institute. My colleague in the social healing at On Being, Lucas Johnson, joined me in facilitating this conversation and the entire gathering, and you'll hear his voice too. So, good morning. So for this conversation, there were 4 questions I was given to frame, to think about this. And what I want to do again is that we are up here maybe for 40 minutes, something like that, and then open this conversation to the room. And I think these questions are so huge and rich, and I'm going to repeat them again at the end, that we can kind of collectively, or you can collectively also ponder them. How do we reckon with our collective traumas when they are so closely intertwined with the collective traumas of another community? What do we do on our own? What do we do together? How do we use this reckoning as the basis of healing? I think I said at the beginning that I think of myself primarily as a student of the human condition, a listener to the human condition, and for me, the geologic layers of human pain and fear and trauma that underlie the realities and struggles we've been talking about are primarily what I see and what I want to be present to and help address. And trauma also, as we are learning with ever greater intricacy, is the ultimate of what words cannot touch, right? We actually know that this is lodged in our bodies, that trauma actually bypasses and thwarts our cognitive processes. But words are what we have to work with, in part. And I will say, and I want to say this because, Loaay, you actually contested this on the first day, and just as a, in another context. There is a generalization, an assumption, an assertion that I also read in a lot of the writings of people in this room, that the two sides, I hate this language of the two sides, but let's say Israelis and Palestinians. And of course, that is just such a general, an absurd generalization in itself, but are not conscious, aware, even curious enough about the trauma of the other side. You did say that you contest some of that generalization, so I want to get at that. But I will, and that was an acknowledgement that was embedded in Marzouk's poem. So I thought I would like to start with each of you just saying a little bit about where you came from, your family of origin, and how a consciousness of the trauma of the other was transmitted to you or not. And if so, and how that has emerged and continued to progress for you. So why don't we start with you, Loaay?
Okay. So thanks for that. First of all, I grew up in Jat. It's a very small village in the center of the country. And my house was very far from the village itself, from the center of the village. So we didn't really have neighbors. So I grew up without neighbors and without anybody living near our house. So I had to find something to do on my own when I come back from school and to play. So I found the television, the TV, as the place that I can see the world, I can play, I can understand the world and learn about it. And because our house was so far from the village, we didn't have any channels. The only channel that we had was the educational channel, the Israeli educational channel. So I learned Arabic from my parents, and then I learned Hebrew from the TV. So I speak about both languages as my mother tongue, even though it's not. So I learned Hebrew very early, and then I discovered the Israeli side and the Israeli narratives very early in my life. And when I came to school, I understood that that was very special. Not everybody knows where we are living. And I didn't think anything about the Palestinian side, because in the educational Israeli channel, you can't see another side. So I thought, okay, we're living here, I'm learning this language, it's Israel, I'm Israeli. That's how I grew up, understanding that I'm Israeli. That's the thing, that's the whole thing that I grew up in. Mm-hmm. So I understood the holidays, the Israeli holidays, the Jewish holidays. I understood the collective history of Israel and the Holocaust as a part of it. And the stories of the history of the Holocaust and the Jewish communities in Europe as a part of it. So it was a very big part of my childhood. Hmm. And then when we started to learn history in schools, it was, even though it was Arabic schools, but still, it was an Israeli system. So we didn't learn anything about Palestine. We didn't learn anything about any kind of history other than the Jewish history in Europe. 40% of what we learned was about Jewish history. The other 40 was about World War II. That's also Jewish history in this kind. And the 20% was about Islam and the history of Islam 1,000 years ago. So we didn't learn anything about ourselves. We didn't learn anything about our history, about our identity. And I thought for a very long time that I'm Israeli, I'm a part of a minority, and I don't know anything else. And I think what made the change to make me understand, okay, I'm a different part of Israeli. Mm-hmm. I can't be this kind of Israeli, was the second Intifada. Okay. I was very young. I was 10 years old, and it was the first time I've seen my father crying. We were watching TV, and he saw Muhammad al-Durra, and he saw that scene, and he started crying, and I didn't understand what's happening. So I think that was the first time that I understood, okay, there is this story of the Holocaust, this story of the Jewish history, but there's another story that I don't know. And somebody needs to tell me this story. And it was very hard to ask my parents to talk about it. They didn't want me to think about it for now. They thought that I'm too young for that, being 10 years old. So it took me some time, and I started reading things. And then I understood, okay, it's more complicated than just a Jewish story of the Holocaust and another story that I don't know anything about. Mm-hmm.
And so for you, it was really a consciousness of the trauma of your people that came a little bit later. Mm-hmm. And do you think that is true of many Palestinians?
I think it depends where you grew up. For example, in the north of the country, I know that they go for a lot of national camps, and they learn about nationality, they learn about their identity of being Palestinians living in Israel. I know that from friends that grew up in the north of the country. If you grow up in the West Bank, you see the soldiers all the day, for you, it's part of your life. You know that you can't visit the sea because there's this wall. I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't know that because I grew up in the triangle, and the only thing that I know was my little village. So the wall is now, it's very close to my house. It's very close to my village. But before that, it was just a fence. And I didn't understand why we need fence. It's just for safety of something. I didn't know these things.
And you've done really interesting work in terms of how the wall shows up in children's literature, Israeli as Jewish, as well as in Hebrew, as well as Arabic. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So Yochi, a little bit about where you came from, your family of origin. I know your father you were the child of a Holocaust survivor father, and how a consciousness of the trauma of the other was transmitted or not to you, and how that has emerged.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, I'm still, he's not with us anymore, but I'm still a daughter of a Holocaust survivor. Actually, my mother was also a Holocaust survivor. And so growing up in the house of two Holocaust survivors it's hard to say when it started, but I felt it any minute from the moment I remember myself. My mother didn't used to speak so much, but my father spoke all the time, again and again, the same stories about the Holocaust, the Shoah, as we called it in Hebrew. And since I was a very young child, he kept telling the same stories. It was very hard for a young child to listen to that, but I was listening very carefully. I was afraid from those stories. They were the same stories all the time. Every time I was afraid again. And we were 5 children. I have 4 brothers, and I'm the only girl. And he kind of chose me to be the one who will remember. And I took part in it. So I remember the stories very well, but when I grew up a little bit, I didn't want to hear anything about the Holocaust. So I went to the university to learn history, English history, early modern English history, anything but not Jewish history, nothing about the Holocaust. And just after he died, 15 years ago, I started to try to understand this intergenerational trauma and what it's doing to my life, and how can I, cut this cycle of trauma and find my own memory. I call it to create my own memory. And while I was trying to create my own memory, I came across other traumatic memories. So to your question, my father he couldn't realize the trauma of the other. For him, it was his own trauma, the loss of his father. My grandfather was dead, murdered in Auschwitz, the whole family. So for him, it was too much to think about the trauma what happened to the Palestinians in connection to what happened to him. I mean, when he came to Israel after the war, he came in 1946, in an illegal way. He came to Israel, and he was alone, and with 2 of his brothers who survived with him, and they came to Jaffa.
Yeah.
And Jaffa was empty. It was empty because people were, the Palestinian people were speaking about language, how to call it, Gurshu.
Run away.
No, not run away.
Expelled.
Expelled. It depends how you call it. But the houses there were empty. Yeah. And they went into one of the houses. And when I was a child, he was telling me the story that how they find the house in Jaffa. And from time to time, when I asked him, yes, but how did you took this house? It wasn't yours. He would say, how can you compare? You cannot compare. We suffered. We didn't have a house. We have to have a house, a home.
And you have other family coming, and he was
He was trying to...
He was finding room for himself and for other family members.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is that he couldn't, for him, being a survivor, he couldn't see the suffering of the other. I think we, the second generation, the third generation, should see the connection between the Nakba and between the Holocaust.
Yeah. You've also done some scholarship also about how in those immediate years, those early years, there was seeing, even if there was also that trauma of people were literally had escaped for their lives, had lost so much, and yet there was a seeing that these houses were empty because other and also a memory of empty houses in the places they had come from. But very quickly that memory was lost, repressed. It was too hard to hold.
Yes, during the 48 war, we know of poets and politicians who saw the connection between the two catastrophic events. And they spoke about it and they wrote about it. Even very Zionist poets such as Natan Alterman or Avot Yeshurun, who was a Holocaust survivor himself.
And Golda Meir.
She went to Haifa. And she said that I can still see the hot meals in the houses, and I cannot think about other places that Jews were expelled from them. So she said that. But what happened during the years, it's like the Zionist atmosphere changed, and the idea that there is such a kind of competition. There's a kind of competition about who suffers more and who is the victim and who is the perpetrator. So after 10 or 20 years later, it's not that people didn't remember or you couldn't speak about it anymore, about the connection. And when we at Van Leer, like 5 or 7 years ago, we did an event about the Shoah and the Nakba. So we had, near the Institute, we had people demonstrating against us. So how can you compare? Right. And you, even if you try to explain, we are not comparing, but we have to understand there are two national communities that living with a trauma. Yeah. And we have to acknowledge the trauma of the other, because otherwise we will be repeating the same thing all the time.
Yeah. I want to read, so this is this book from this project that you've been part of, and I just want to read something that you wrote. And I'd also like, Loaay, for you to just... I feel like this is maybe where you've come to after all kinds of wrestling and thinking about your conversations with your father. And I'm also curious if these are words you would use or how you might nuance it. So the Holocaust and its scars played a crucial role in the Nakba, not just during the battles, but also later when the Nakba was silenced and denied, while also playing a role in the discourse of Holocaust denial in the Arab states. The Holocaust and the Nakba, which, as Avot Yeshurun put it, looked into each other's eyes and which cannot be understood separately, gradually became competitors for memory and victimhood, each excluding the other to each side's great horror. The silence and denial of the Nakba is also the mirror image of turning the Holocaust into a monolithic story of disaster, revival, and redemption. The Holocaust cannot be separated from the state of Israel, just as it cannot be separated from the question of Palestine. Anxieties, silencing, and repressions are not everlasting. They emerge in the cracks and break out in various forms. There's a lot in those sentences. I just wonder if either one of you want to just...
Yeah, the idea of the silence and the silence on talking on the other trauma, and the idea of not talking on your own trauma that we deal with, you with your father and me with my parents and grandmother, that they didn't want to to talk about anything like that. They didn't want us to be political. They wanted us to be different, to be over it.
Yeah.
But you can't be over it when you live it every day in your life. So in my research in children literature and in folklore and folk tales and fairy tales, I started from that point, from trying to understand this silence coming through the stories. So I started at my first analyzing children literature. I started with my grandmother's stories to try to hear something about the Nakba through her stories. And one of the stories that she kept telling us was the story of Jbene. Jbene is a very well-known Palestinian story that after research I know that Grimm brothers also have a version of Jbene. It's the Goose Girl, if anybody knows it. So the Goose Girl tells the story of a girl who got expelled from her house to go to marry the prince in another village, in another kingdom. And in the Palestinian version, in the way going to the prince's house, they switch, and the princess, Jbene, switch with the servant. And the servant become the princess, and the princess become the servant. So this idea of switching places after you expelled from your house, my grandmother talked about it a lot through this story. So this silence became something that she used not to talk about the Nakba, but to talk only about the Nakba through this story.
Right.
So I think this is a way of breaking the silence about those traumas. And in another understanding of this paragraph, when we talk about trauma, we talk about the feeling. I'm not talking about the psychological thing. I'm talking about the feeling that we feel, the emotions. And I understand feelings and emotions through literature. When I read some literature, I can understand things differently because I feel like a lot of the authors and Palestinian authors, Arab authors from all over the Arab world can understand things and can depict them differently in the literature, and then they can help me understand what I'm feeling. So I brought a paragraph from a book that I really love to mention, Children of the Ghetto. It's wrote by Elias Khouri, the late Elias Khouri. He died last week, and he was a mentor for me. He was a very important author in my life. And he wrote a lot. He's a Lebanese author, and he wrote a lot about the Nakba and how we can understand it through literature. And in our project that Shai mentioned, Maktub, Professor Yuda Shenhav translated his literature, Elias Khouri's literature, into Hebrew. So I want to read maybe a paragraph from Children of the Ghetto, Awlad al-Ghetto, and he says this sentence: I don't want to draw a comparison between the Holocaust and the Nakba. I hate such comparisons and believe the numbers game is vulgar and nauseating. What's the word? Nauseating. Thank you. Nauseating. Thank you. That was the word, yeah. I hate such comparisons and I believe the numbers game is vulgar and nauseating. I have nothing but contempt for Roger Graudi and others who deny the Nazi Holocaust. Graudi, who walked the tightrope of ideology from Marxism to Christianity to Islam, and who ended up a mercenary at the doorstep of the Arab oil sheikdoms, committed the crime of playing with numbers, reducing that of the Jews who died at the hands of the Nazis from 6 million to 3 million. No, Monsieur Garaudi. In the Holocaust, everybody died. For whoever kills one innocent person is like someone who kills all humankind. As it says in the mighty book, whosoever slays a soul not to retaliate for a soul slain, nor for corruption done in the land, shall be as if he had slain humankind altogether. That's Elias Khoury from Children's of the Ghetto.
From where he quotes, no? The last paragraph, זה ציטוט של מה?
The mighty book from Brita Yishan.
It's from the Quran?
Yeah.
Judaism says something very similar.
Yeah,
right?
that's
one
what
life,
I was
one life is a
asking.
world.
The mighty book, الكتاب المقدس.
Yeah,
so
right. So I was asking
it's from
about the
Quran.
book because it reminds me, we both were there 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
When was it? So we are running this program in Leer of intellectual journeys. It's Palestinians and Israeli Jews together. So we had 5 weeks of young Palestinians, of Israelis who came from the war, who served in Gaza and other places, Israelis from the right wing and left wing, everyone together. And it was this morning, so it was a very challenging time to be together. Mm-hmm. And it was this morning, on Sunday morning, after they murdered in Gaza the 6 hostages. So I had to start the lesson. For that morning I had to teach something about Protestantism. It's interesting. What?
Scholastic.
Yes. And I said, okay, how should I start the day? And we have students in the class who learned with Hirsch, with one of the hostages, mm-hmm. And what should I say? Because it's so diverse and everyone in pain, and it's not our pain or their pain. And actually, what I choose, it's from the Talmud. Mm. It says, whoever destroys a soul, it is considered as if he destroyed an entire world. Yeah. And whoever saves a life, it is considered as if he saved an entire world. And then I said something personally about one of the hostages, Carmel Gato. But it's interesting also in connected to what we spoke to yesterday about religion, yes, and the place of religion, because when I was thinking in which words to start the day, so I went back to the Talmud, to the religion, to the traditional sentences. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to mention also regarding...
Yes, I would say also, so if these tenets of religion were taken seriously, yes, ultimately seriously, that would have a different effect than some of the ways religion inserts itself destructively.
Yeah, amen. Yeah. But I wanted to add something to what Loaay said about the power of literature. Yeah. So when I wrote the book, the memoir about my father, I decided not to be just with the real fact or just with history. I felt that in order for me to create my own memory of his Shoah, in his and my trauma, I have also to use my imagination. So the way I did it, so I had 3 layers. One layer was the stories he used to tell me. I remember them, and they are recorded also in Yad Vashem. The second layer was I went to archives in Austria and Germany to find the real facts. So he told me the stories, but I just wanted to know what happened there really. And the third layer was my imagination. So there are parts of the story that I felt that I have to imagine. I have to try to find the words of his mother, the thoughts of his mother, how he felt as a child. And this imagination helped me to get over, or to be in a place that I can live now with the story. I'm not trapped in it.
I want to go do one more thing, and then I'm just going to turn it to you. Okay. I want to come back to your work with children's literature. I mean, you've done a lot of looking at Palestinian children's literature in particular, and it seems to me that at least in this, what you're looking at now, there's a lot of dwelling within Palestinian trauma, right? And as you say, and I don't know if that has evolved also since the Second Intifada. It's also this removal of generations, which is true. And, I spent a long time in Germany, and that's been interesting to watch the generations there, because the story you tell here about the first generation, like the early silence, is also true in that place of the place that had committed the violence. Also the same total inability to speak. But that doesn't seem to be the case now, and also after all of the history that has passed. So I just want to note that. And then you wrote this really interesting paper examining the separation wall in 3 Israeli and 3 Palestinian children's books. And you said that the Israeli books, I think you're using kind of scholarly language, but create what are recognized to be conditions for a positive contact experience. But they assume a symmetry that is not real. Mm-hmm. And that the Palestinian stories emphasize an awareness that these have become places where Palestinian children become aware of oppression and empowerment. And you said both need a critical reading, both of these genres. One of the stories, the story of the oil secret, is that a Palestinian story?
Yeah,
it is. It has this ending, we must release the earliest Arab prisoner, the future. And later you wrote something about how after this research on images of the separation, you noticed this recurring phenomenon about how in this literature, how the wall is dealt with. It's solid and realistic and fixed, but it can be crossed and penetrated. Mm-hmm. And I just want to say, before I read what you wrote, so I lived in Berlin during the time of the wall. And I once wrote something about how what I started hearing in East Germany, which actually the wall did not surround the East Germans, it surrounded West Berlin, but they felt that it was around them. And, how children in school, when they were invited to draw pictures of where they came from, the wall was there, and then there would be birds flying over it and insects crawling under it. And a little girl who I knew very well, came to her father one day, and he told me about this with great pain and said, my daughter came to me, she'd had this incredible idea, and she said, Papi, let's go along the wall and keep on going, because somewhere it will have to come to an end. And of course, he had to tell her that was not true. Mm-hmm. And you said, in the face of the wall and the barriers which suppress the Palestinians' freedom, and you also talk about the wall within, this is not just the physical wall, which suppress the Palestinians' freedom to move between the different parts of Palestine, mythical and legendary creatures and monsters capable of flying appear. Dragons, winged horses, and fairies, which appear frequently in this type of book, as a tool and a legitimate way to cross and penetrate the wall. However, the subject was not limited to mythological creatures. These books also featured a lot of kites and butterflies. And just one of the things that occurred to me also, and then I'm going to stop talking, is that it's come up, we've heard a lot of stories in the last few days of people with their parents, and even with Hiba yesterday, or with their children, and people realizing that they precisely have to engage the future because children refuse to not have a future.
Exactly.
Right? Somewhere we give that up. So I'm going to stop talking, but this is all very moving to me and important, right?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for quoting this. In the last 4 years, I work on this project of understanding walls in children's literature, and I started with our wall, the Israeli separation wall, and then moved to understand also other walls in the world. One of them, the Berlin Wall, with all the differences. There is a lot of differences.
Totally different. But
it's
what we do with walls. Yeah.
Exactly. But in the children's literature, how we depict walls, how we talk about walls, and how we understand walls. And this idea of flying above the walls, it's very important because I see it a lot in the Palestinian children literature through mythical creatures. The story with the dragons is very interesting because they talk about St. George and how he slay the dragon. But in the Palestinian story, the dragon is the saint. The dragon become the victim of the occupation when a soldier's shot a bullet, and the dragon stands before a child to save him and took the bullet and dies. So it's crazy to think about it, that the dragon, the villain in the story, in the mythical story, the mythological story, becomes the savior of the Palestinian child. So this idea of the dragon flying above the wall and giving the Palestinian children the option to see the land, the whole land, the bird side of the land is very important in these books. And I can see that also in other literature, like German literature talking about the wall, but I can't see it in Israeli literature. And this is one of the most interesting things that I find. Israeli children literature don't talk about the wall this way. It usually talks about the wall saying it's very important to have this wall and it's saving us, and how we can live with the wall with understanding that both sides are victims of the wall. And this idea of both sides are victims of the wall is a very problematic.
I'm just curious how you're...
Well, I know Loaay very well, and we're friends, but every time I hear that, it's hurt, and it's frustrating. There's a nice, very nice concept that I like of the historian and philosopher Dominique Lacapre, Italian. He speaks about empathic unsettlement. And he differs between identification and empathic unsettlement. So when one hear the other story, so to identify, if you say I identify with you, it means like something to blur the difference between us and to say I can go into your shoes. And when speaking about trauma, Dominique Lacapre says, when speaking about trauma, we cannot really go into the other's shoes, but we can have some kind of empathic unsettlement.
Be empathically unsettled.
Yeah, and it's not. So it's something that leaves you unsettled. It's something that disturbs. It's not redeeming narrative. It's something that leaves you. So I think that's what I feel when I hear Loaay. So I cannot really identify, but I'm very empathic and very unsettled.
I think you said that is also a goal of this project altogether, to empathically unsettle all around.
Yes, and I think it's really it has a moral value or political value to try to be empathic unsettled. Yeah.
Okay.
Loaay, as you were. Well, both of you, as you were talking about the stories of the silence, I couldn't help but thinking about, I heard different reasons for the silence. So on one hand, Loaay, your parents didn't want to tell you, there was a sense of not yet. They didn't want to tell you about the Palestinian story or the Nakba. There was a not yet to that. And part of that must have been because they wanted to keep you safe, right? And they felt like it might endanger you. And that's very familiar to me. And I think, Yochi, there was a sense in which, like, your father must have, on one hand, the reality of his trauma, there wasn't enough safety for him to confront the reality of the Nakba, right? And at the same time, it seemed to me that there was a purposefulness in the repetition of the story that must have been about your safety in a way, right? And so I think about how the notion of safety and security like functions with respect to trauma, and how I feel like there must be a sort of a not yet that keeps reemerging. Like there's a truth that's known here, but we're too insecure to face it yet, right now. Does that make sense? How do we deal with the need to heal and confront trauma within the context of insecurity, within the context of ongoing? Because the time seems like it won't come unless we confront it. And yet, there's this not yet, right? I don't know. Do you have thoughts about that?
I'm not sure I have I'm not sure I have an answer, but I think it's even more complicated because it's not that the Nakba ended or that Jews can be secure now in Israel. So if I think about what happened in the last catastrophic year, or if I think from the Jewish side about October 7th, so people saw it in the eyes or felt it in the body, in the eyes of pogroms and of the Holocaust, and etc. Even if you cannot compare what happened, but you feel it. It comes across. So it's again and again. It's not that you can say, okay, and from the other side, what's happening now in Gaza or in Lebanon now, it's the continuation of something that is never ended. So. Your question is very good. How to start to acknowledge the pain of the other and work with it and to make some secure space. It's very, very hard. We try to do it in our own home in Van Leer. We try to do it as much as we can in different projects, but it's a lifetime, I think. It will never end. I mean, we will have to do it until the end of the days.
I'm thinking of what you're saying about trauma and healing. And I'm not sure that we can heal. I'm not sure that we should also. I don't really know, but I'm just speaking about it. So healing is something, I think it's more than we can do, but we can understand the trauma, maybe in different terms, in different concepts, in different understanding of how we live today. It's urgent for us. It's not something that have ended and we need to deal with it just to heal it. So I'm not sure we can heal it, but I understand things, as I said, through literature and concepts, maybe sometimes to try to give a definition or some kind of definition of the feeling that we have, that language not always have the option to give us to understand the things. For example, there's a concept that Freud talked about a lot, the unheimlich, that we don't really have it in Hebrew. We don't. The uncanny.
Or the
I don't think one of these translation is good for the unheimlich, because unheimlich have a lot of other things. When Freud describes the unheimlich, he's talking about this strange feeling where something that supposed to be familiar, supposed to be safe, supposed to be intimate, secure, becomes very strange, very alienated, very threatening. And in the first translation to Hebrew, they translated it to ha'me'uyam, the threatening. So, and then ha'al-beiti, or the threaten, and then the al-beiti, unhomely or the unhome.
Yeah.
And in Arabic, when we talk about it, we also talk about bayt ula baytiya, not being at home, not feeling at home when you are at your home.
Right.
But still, I prefer the German term because it has another understanding. Unheimlich, there's Heim, the home, and there is Heimat, the homeland. So you have both. And I think that this term of das Unheimlich, when we talk about it as a Palestinian living in Israel, in my homeland, but it's not called anymore the homeland. We have, from 2018, we have the national law, so I'm not part of it. I'm a second citizen. I'm not part of it. I don't feel home, being at home, but still I can think of another home. So this feeling is not only physical or metaphorical or emotional. It's a lot more than that. To feel not part of the main thing that you are. So to feel in your body, in your identity, to feel alienated, to feel unhomely. And when we talk about home, again, it's a very emotional thing when we see people that their home is destroyed and they live now in tents. And when I look at pictures and photograph now from Gaza and see the domicide and the ruins of the homes, of the home, it's hard for me even to talk about das Unheimlich, because it became physical now. It became urgent now that we talk about any house, not just home, any house for people who's living outside, people who became homeless, who became refuged. So it's hard to talk about healing and trauma when we still have the urgent thinking of what's happening now.
And I just want to add that as it takes generations, because when I'm here at Europe, I feel unheimlich. We are now in Holland. My family we're not from Holland, but never mind. I feel the Europe here. In Europe, I feel very close to Europe, but I feel also very alienated from Europe, and a little bit afraid, and a little bit not safe, and so it will take generations. But if I can add something, a kind of hope to that also, so I can share that lately I was part of a group, was trying to help to people who are working in the south of Israel, in the kibbutzim of the south, from October 7th. They're starting to think of rebuilding the kibbutzim and asking themselves questions about memory and how to commemorate what happened there. So they gathered together a group of scholars who are dealing with memory and all these questions to try to help them think about those questions. And there was this man there. He was from one of the kibbutzim, and I think he told something very touching for me. So this special kibbutz lost. They have new 100 orphans, or yatomim, orphans, from this day, in different ages. And they're thinking about October 7th, that is coming soon, and how to commemorate all these parents. And he shared that he himself was a child that had a trauma. In his childhood, his parents were killed in a car accident, two of them in the same day. And he grew up in the same kibbutz. And while he was growing up, he said everyone treated him very nicely and helped him to grow, but no one talks with him about his parents. Because we have to be strong, we have to continue, we are strong Israelis, etc. And now, when he thinks about those 100 new orphans, he started this project. He asked members of the kibbutz, people who knew the parents, to write small stories, good memories that they have from the parents, things they did together. And in the 7th of October, every child will get a box with stories about, good stories or nice memories or memories about his parents. And I thought it's a very nice way to think about memory, because the thing with memory is also what to remember. We have so much to remember. We can, where to put our emphasis. There are things I think it's better to forget. I mean, okay, it's written somewhere, but you have to choose what you want to remember in order to continue your life. So you have to remember, but sometimes you don't have to remember everything. And if I can add another thing, it reminds me also of a story of a Holocaust survivor. When she was 10 years old, she survived alone in the forest for 2 years. There was just one woman who came from time to time to bring her food. And in her book, years later, the name of the book is Friends of the Forest. Her name was Donia Rosen, she died, but she wrote, and I quote, "I want to establish a monument for us, a monument that will reach the heavens, a monument that the whole world will see, a statue not of marble or stone, but of good deeds. I firmly believe that only such a monument can guarantee a better future for you and your children."
So, Yochi, I feel like what you're saying is that it's not that there are things that we don't remember, but we need to be able to choose when to engage. Memories that we choose when we can turn to look at and confront. Is that what I'm understanding? Or is it really not remembering?
I would say for me, for my personal story, my personal trauma of my family, not remembering. I remember enough.
And not transmitting, not passing on the memory.
Right.
I mean, I feel like this is connected to you saying maybe healing is not what we're looking for. Yeah. I think then there's a question of whether it's possible for us as humans to not remember, right? Because yeah. How much control where that is, where memories live inside us.
Yeah, but no, I'm not saying not to remember, to choose where to put your emphasis, what to remember, how to remember.
Yeah.
I think there's more on that, on who are we? Are we historians or researchers, scholars, or just parents or just children? I think that it should be different of each, because I do want to remember. I do want the historians to
So they're
write
different
these
keepers
things.
of different memories.
Exactly. And I'm thinking, sorry that I'm thinking about literature all the time, but that's how I think. Aleph Bet Yehoshua wrote a story called Mul Hayarot, in front of the forests. And in the story there is a Palestinian old man that he's silent, he can't speak, his tongue is cut, so he can't speak. And in the story he's kind of helping the keeper of the forest, and in the end of the story he burned down the forest. And after he burned down the forest, we can see the ruins of a Palestinian village under the forest, that the forest hid. And I think this is the mind that we are, maybe if we choose to forget, or if we choose to not talk about, somebody will burn it down till we see the ruins that we did. That's what I'm asking from historians. Please keep it. Please write everything. While being parents, we can sometimes, maybe we should, maybe we must, forget some things as parents, but not as historians or as scholars. Or
There's the other poet, Chaim Guri, Hamotad's father, who wrote, "I'm full of abandoned villages," right? אני מלא בכפרים עזובים. That means that even if I try to forget, our identities or our histories, Palestinians and Jews in Israel, are so intertwined. Yeah, so we are
So
full,
intertwined. Yeah.
intertwined. Yeah, so we are full with empty villages.
So I want to turn it to the room.
Do you? What time is it?
Yeah, but that's what I'm wondering.
Were we supposed to? What time were we meant to break? Because I wonder if we take a break and come back.
That's exactly what I was hoping.
Well, great minds. Before we do that, this is so rich, so we can just keep going with this. And I actually think we should all four come back up here.
Yeah.
But I just want to put the questions back out in the room. I believe that questions also have work something, even if they don't get answered. So how do we reckon with our collective traumas when they are so closely intertwined with the collective traumas of another community? What do we do on our own? What do we do together? How do we use this reckoning as the basis of healing or some alternative to healing?
Thanks.
Thank you.
After we took a short break, we came back to the interactive conversation you're about to hear in the room between Yochi, Loaay, and the 20 or so participants, mostly from Israel, both Jewish and Palestinian, but some European. The first voice you'll hear is Michael Fagelson, the CEO of the Van Leer Group Foundation. This gathering was pulled together by the Leer Jerusalem Institute.
Yeah, I have a question for you, and it's maybe it's actually I'm asking for advice, and it's not necessarily about Palestine and Israel, but it is about trauma. And sometimes I have the experience of being with someone who has a trauma that's related to mine. It's different, but it's related to mine, and there's a tension between them. And I have this need, I'm not sure if they're going to be able to recognize mine, and I'm kind of only prepared to recognize theirs if they recognize mine. Mm-hmm. And so if they're feeling the same way, usually kind of nothing happens or we end up in a fight. So when I'm in that, what's your advice for me what to do?
Can join intellectual journeys.
Sorry, what did you say?
I told you you can join our program in the Institute.
That's what we do in the program.
But I can give the example of some moment, very, very tough moment we had this summer. And I think it's maybe a kind of an answer. So we had this 3-day seminar of alumni of the program dealing with the trembling house.
We call it fragile home.
Okay, fragile home. The seminar about fragile home, and we don't have to explain why. And there was this moment, one of the Palestinians participants, she was speaking about gay and lesbians from Palestine that escaping to Tel Aviv, and about the problems around that. And in everything, everyone was empathic and listened, etc. And in the end of this lecture, she showed us a picture from a few weeks earlier of a soldier, IDF soldier, with the rainbow flag.
Yeah, the pride flag.
Huh?
The pride flag.
Pride flag, standing in Gaza, and on the flag it's written "In the name of love," and behind him the ruins of Gaza. It's unsettling and shocking.
It's unheimlich. Unheimlich.
Unheimlich.
And it's triple.
It's triple.
In the name of God.
No, there it's in the name of love. Yeah. And then in the class there are students who came from Gaza or fight in Gaza, and Palestinians, etc. So, what do you do? I mean, how? And she asked them, "Okay, what do you think about this picture?" And there was silence.
Yeah, and when some of the Palestinian participants talked about their anger and talked about the hypocrisy that they see in this picture, some of the Israelis say that you're hurting us by saying that, because he could be one of our family, he could be a person. So they try to personalize him, and the Palestinians saw him as just a representation of the army. And that was very complicated to try to wrap everything together, but in the end, we understood that Zainab, the presenter, didn't want to wrap things. She just wanted to open things and to feel things. And you can feel unsettled because it's unsettled situation. And trying to feel that the other one in the room can be a combatant, can be a fighter, can be a soldier, doesn't mean that you need to feel comfortable with sitting there.
So maybe my answer to you, Michael, is to talk about your pain. Just to tell your story. And I think it works from the other side. When they hear about your pain, your suffer, your family, your background, and not start with big ideological issues.
Yochi, I thought you were going to the second example, because I think it's also...
Okay, the third example.
The third one? Okay.
Okay, and the last one. So we had this, actually, in Asaf's seminar, this question, Asaf wanted us, offered that we will invite to the last meeting of the seminar a former Palestinian minister or terrorist, both. So he was a terrorist in the 70s. Yeah. He tried to bomb a car in the middle of Israel. It didn't work because an accident happened to him, but he would do that. And he sat 20 years in the Israeli jail. And then he
got released just after the Oslo process in 1993.
Okay, he got released, and he lived in Gaza now. He became a Palestinian minister of prisoners.
Yeah.
And then he lived in Gaza now, and he ran away from Gaza to Egypt after October 7th. And Asaf offered to Zoom with him with our students.
And he knows Hebrew.
Okay.
He knows Hebrew very well. Yeah.
From prison.
Fluently because of the jail.
Yeah, he
learned Hebrew in jail.
And this was a big question for us, how the students will react to that. And I must say that in the beginning, we thought that it's too much, and we had enough this summer, and maybe this time we will say no. And then Loaay...
Yeah, I felt that we have to listen to him, because I didn't know the person. I really didn't know him, but I know Asaf, and I know that even all the stories about this person, this man, he has something to say, and a lot of the Palestinian people sit in the Israeli prison. That doesn't mean anything for me. I don't really see things like that, because you can sit in the prison for nothing. So I don't.
He
I
didn't
don't know.
sit for nothing.
Yeah, but I didn't know. I didn't know him, and he was the minister of prisoners. He knows the stories of the prisoners. He knows what does that means, and he lives in Gaza, and he left Gaza. And when I thought about it, I thought that that's very hurting for me, that they don't want to hear him talk. Because if we think, I don't think about this moment. I'm thinking about 20 years later, in the future. And I always think like that because I work in children's literature. I don't think about today. I think about the future generation that will become the adults. So I'm thinking about 20 years from now, either one of these people will kill the other, or we find a way to live together. I don't know. I don't know each way would succeed. But if one of us would survive this, so we don't have a problem. If both of us survive this, so we have a problem. We need to talk. Mm-hmm. We need to find a way to talk, even with people that we don't agree with. So maybe in the Israeli side, they would say he was a terrorist, but I can say the same thing on Israeli ministers. So should I not talk to them? But I have to. I live in Israel. I have an Israeli citizenship. They are sitting in the Knesset. I'm not talking only about Ben Gvir, okay? I'm talking about a lot more than Ben Gvir, about people who served in the army. And for me, some of them are terrorists. That's how they act. So if I don't want to talk to them, and the Israelis don't want to talk to the Palestinians, so we are going to the first way that one of the people will survive and the other one won't survive, and that's it. So I can't continue. I told you I can't continue with the project, because if we choose this way, so we are saying there's no future for us. So I don't have anything to do with the project, because in this project we are thinking 10 years, 20 years ahead. We are trying to understand what is going on, because these young students will become the politicians of tomorrow, will become the scholars of tomorrow. And we want to say something to them. You can talk to everybody. Mm-hmm. And try to hear. You can agree. You can oppose to that. And that's okay. Let's open it to question. So it was very, very hard for me. And I talked to Yochi then. Let's just hear him, because I feel it's very personal for me.
And did you hear him?
Yes.
And how was it for you to hear him? For you, Yochi?
No, I wasn't in the class. I'm running the program, but I'm not in every class. But Asaf was there.
Yeah. Well, just add another layer to the story. A day before, I met a group of former Israeli security and military generals who are more inclined to the left. And I told them that the day after we were going to meet this person. And obviously everybody knew him because he was part of the Oslo process. He was part of the PLO, he was part of the Palestinian Authority. And one of them, Matan Vinai, who used to be a very known Israeli general from the army, said, give my best regards to Hisham. And then he told to his friends the story that Hisham is a terrorist who injured only himself because he was with the whatever was a grenade or a bomb exploded in his hands. And so I gave him my best regards from Matan Vilnai, and I used this story with the students in order to let them know that only 20 years ago or 30 years ago, Israeli generals sat with former terrorists to make peace. So we know a lot about Oslo. We can take years about was it intended to be peace or not peace or whatever. But the fact is that for a very brief moment in history, Israeli politics and Israeli government acknowledged the right of Palestinians to live free and dealt with former terrorists that they used to haunt. And it's very, very difficult to talk about acknowledging terrorism and sitting with them to the table to make peace, because we're now post the 7th of October and it's a very different type of terrorism. And we're in it, we're still in the trauma, we're not post-traumatic, both of us still traumatic. But I told them that in comparison, I mean, when you look about peace processes throughout the world, throughout history, or recent history, it's always been former combatants shaking hands and reaching peace. And that will be the end of Israel-Palestine conflict. That former combatants will have to shake hands and make peace. So it was difficult to them, for some of them. One student wasn't able to he left the room, he wasn't in the conversation, but all of the rest were there, and it was very interesting for them, and they asked very good questions, and he had very good answers, and I think it was very good for all.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the language we use. And I think there's something very harmful in the use of the word terrorism or terrorist. It's such an asymmetric word. So terrorism is what power always labels resistance. It's what states call the people who oppose the state. It defines people you don't talk to when actually you have to talk to them. I can make this, I've been really cautious about what I say because I'm so interested to hear what Israelis and Palestinians say to each other across their divides. But I can take ownership of terrorism because I think it's really America after 9/11 that weaponized the use of the word terrorism. And at the time I felt this is a terrible mistake because we're going to see the ways in which other countries are going to identify their opponents as terrorists and use that justification to do the worst violence against them and blow me down. Russia and Chechnya proved me right very early on in the day. But when we look at the divides between Israel and Palestine, this use of the word terrorism is so counterproductive that I'd like us all to think really carefully. And even the minister from the PA that was invited was never a terrorist. You're right, his intentions were to kill, but he only hurt himself. He inflicted terror on no one. So there's another word for him. He's a failed bomber. He's an attempted murderer, but he didn't actually. That's someone who has another crime, but he wasn't actually a terrorist. And maybe if we were to label things more precisely, killers, attempted killers, bombers, attempted bombers, it would also allow us to put some symmetry into the fact that I think Loaay is hinting at, which is it's really hard for the rest of the world looking at the asymmetry of violence being done to Gaza to treat 7 October as an event of terror and the war that followed after 7 October in some other terms, because terror defines the use of violence for all who are on the receiving end. So I would be more comfortable if we just thoughtfully put terror on the shelf and used a more specific language that might free us to talk to each other more openly too.
We had an experience with another word, shaheed. You remember that? With the word shaheed, martyr, or in Israeli discourse, it's used as a terrorist. But in Islamic and Arabic use, it's a different meaning. So we were talking about the house and the home, and I read the paper for the students, and I talked about Ghassan Kanafani, and I said, Al-Shaheed Ghassan Kanafani. And they were so angry. Why are you saying Shaheed? And Shaheed is a terrorist, and that. And I was, okay, you can go with that, but let's think about it differently. And the day after, we've been in a tour in Old Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem, and then we've seen St. George. And it's written under his name, St. George, Shaheed Al-Quddis George. Al-Quddis Shaheed George. And I asked him, could this saint be a terrorist? He was trying to kill the dragon. Is he a terrorist? I don't know. So maybe your understanding of the word shaheed is problematic. It's filled with political energy and political meanings. But it's not like that when I say it in Arabic. It's not like that when I say it in Islamic context. It's not like that. So you need to understand both languages. You need to understand maybe another language. And moving between the languages can give us the option always to understand things differently. I'm not talking about perspectives or narratives. No, I'm talking about more than that. Language makes our mindset just open and understand things openly and more largely.
So the truth is I have a question for Loaay, but I felt like I have to respond. And before 9/11, I grew up in Jerusalem during the Second Intifada. And I remember at our Shabbat tables discussing who is a terrorist, who is a freedom fighter, and all this terminology. And this to me was, dinner conversation growing up. And even though I grew up during the Second Intifada, about 6 weeks ago, I said to my mother, I said to her, for the first time, I understand the term terrorism. And I feel like for the last 6 weeks, plus minus, I can't remember, I feel like we've been living in terror in Israel. Ever since Israel took out the Hamas and Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon and in Iran, we're waiting for it to happen. And this wait, to me, is the terrorism. I'm living in fear, almost of the unknown. And I mean, I'm not calling any person here a terrorist, so maybe it's not exactly the point. I mean, maybe there's no contradiction between what I'm saying and what you're pointing to. But I grew up at a very scary time in a very scary place. And at the time, still, terrorist and freedom fighter was a conceptual conversation. But I've been experiencing fear. And I mean, and who am I to experience this fear relative to my counterparts in Gaza who are experiencing something far scarier and more destructive and horrible than I can even imagine. But terrorism, to me, has taken a whole new meaning in the last few weeks.
Can I just respond very briefly? Only that I was not suggesting that we do that binary between freedom fighter and terrorist.
Yeah.
But to be more specific in the nature of the violence that one is accused of, which is a different point. So it's not to glorify anyone.
Right.
It's to get away from the blinding use of language. And the second is just to point out that the terror you've just described is fear of retaliation for acts of violence that Israel's committing.
Yeah.
Which is exactly the kind of complication that I think falling back on terrorism blinds us to.
Yeah.
So I stop there.
Okay.
I have a question for Loaay, but I'm assuming it's later, so go ahead.
Okay, we'll come back.
About children's books. So.
Okay, we'll come back.
Just would like to offer us a thought as a group, use the powerful exchange now emerge from the conversation specifically Loaay and Yochi, and more so use the incisive commentary and to take the discussion on quote-unquote terror back home. And by back home, I mean to offer a reflection on what is or is not going on possibly at Van Leer itself. I was struck, Yochi and Loaay, not only by the debate that occurred as you described it, but the debate that did not occur. Out of respect for silence in your conversation, I found it striking you didn't debate how come there are soldiers of the Israeli army. You call them IDF, but in Palestine we call them IOF. It seems you haven't debated or discussed. Should those be part of your group or not? And for me that's crucial because, why it's crucial, let me put it clearly, because it could be an indicator to what extent, if and when, Van Leer participates or doesn't participate willingly and unwillingly in the racial hierarchy that is Israel, where some lives matter more than others, and some deaths are more grievous than others.
Also?
Just follow up on Eugene and then on the Shaheed. I think, Eugene, that there was a time, 30 years ago, around Oslo, that Israel knew to make the difference between kinds of militant activity. Who is a terrorist? Who is less terrorist? Who is not a terrorist? What's the difference between a person who murdered 20 civilians on a bus and a person that only injured himself, and so on and so forth. And I think that post the 7th of October, these differences have blurred, and I think it's bad for Israeli society. I think it's bad for Israeli security even. I think it's bad for Israel-Palestinian relations in the future, and I hope that it dissipates over time. So that's one thing, but as I said, we're still in the trauma. A second thing, just something interesting about the Shaheed. Our friend Yoni, Professor Jonathan Mendel, has written extensively and talked extensively about the Shaheed and the use of the word Shaheed in Israel. And I remember, I think it was in January, February, after the ground invasion to Gaza, that I referred to him a recording that was published by the Israeli armed forces of a conversation between, he was an Israeli officer, I think he was either a Shin Bet officer or military officer, belongs to Medicine Corps, who talked with one of the managers of a Shifa hospital. And it sounded like a calm conversation between a military officer who's trying to get people evacuated from the hospital unharmed. And he asked the Palestinian manager something about the wounded and the casualties in the hospital. And he responds that fi nas istashhadu, the people have died, and we have to take out the casualties and this and that. And the officer is asking him very calmly, min istashhad. So he uses the verb istashhad in a very, very, very ordinary manner, because he knows that when you use istashhad means just to be a casualty. So I referred it to Yoni. I said, you can use it because you see, even the Israeli military officers are using the word istashhad in the meaning of fallen in war, fallen in battle. So it's all about the politicizing of the shaheed and the root shahad in Arabic.
So I just want to slow the conversation down a little bit, because I did something and I want to acknowledge, like, Khalid, I feel like I moved quickly from you to Asaf. And part of that was because I felt like what you were asking was something for reflection, not necessarily something that needed a response in the room. But I think it might still be sitting with people. And so I just want to slow us down. Okay.
Yeah. So speaking of being unsettled, I think there are two different questions, like, in my mind, and the more important one is not the answer, if there is one, but rather, what would it take to have that question present, like to live at the Institute. But it's not just a question about the Institute, it's a question about the university, it's a question about the street, it's a question about the marketplace, it's a question of being here in The Hague. But what different possibilities of sort of inhabiting these different spaces we would have if this question was more present, like if this question was more pressing, if this question was more on our minds. It's unsettling because yes, there is that question. So that's one thing, I think, and the more important thing, and what I'll say now is, I think, is just me sharing the way that when occasionally this question or similar questions come up, how what answer I would give to myself. And I don't think it's an answer because the question is there, but so I'll just talk about myself in the Institute in this context, that it's about
unsettling people from where they are. So there's a way in which people are on different questions in different positions in different places. And the question is how much can you, I guess, push them, open possibilities, allow people to explore new ways without breaking, without sort of making it no longer impossible for people to listen or hear or live and so I think that it's an open question. I can think of a variety of contexts in which this question emerges about working with different groups in Israeli society, that I can think of no similar way in which this question is so pressing and so depressing as in the context that you raised it.
Thank you for all those questions and remarks, and thank you, Khaled, for this empathic unsettlement. I think I want to answer now, but I want to stress what Shai says, that when there are reserved soldiers or soldiers sitting in our class, and when they see this flag or this picture or whatever, then I believe that they don't go back the same way if they go back. That's what I believe, and it's not just believe. I see them. I speak with them. I see what it's not. It's in small steps, and I prefer to be in touch with them. It's a kind of an answer, but and regarding the question, I think we can do both things together. Working together now for 7 years with Loaay and other friends in the Institute, we can laugh together also. Sometimes we're not always so serious, okay? And you have to laugh, because otherwise you cannot live. And I think you also feel the moment you have to really suffer the presence of your students that came from Gaza, soldiers that came from Gaza. And it's suffering for you. So
I want to invoke John Paul, which I always like to do.
Okay.
Because I feel like what you, I think John Paul Lederach is known to many of us, some of us. He's one of these people who's a giant in the field of conflict resolution, transformation, not necessarily known outside. The person who actually builds peace over 30 years, but is never standing getting the attention when the peace treaties are signed. And I think what you described is what he calls paradoxical curiosity, which is finding it in yourself to want to understand, even as you know, and are planted in, perhaps the pain or the damage that whatever this person represents has done to your identity or your people, right? And that is a quality of moral imagination, which is about what has run through every conversation here, which is this willingness and capacity to imagine and step towards a future in which you can no longer see this person merely as an enemy or treat them as an enemy. And those are beautiful ideas, but what I'm describing are, John Paul says, this always happens where peace is reached, in Northern Ireland, in Colombia, where violence is overcome. It's just something that he's seen on the ground again and again and again. It's happening in this room, too.
I wish Josh was here, because on the first day he spoke about the stages of groups and when will we get to storming, and then he's not here to see it.
He advised us not to wait till the 30th.
Of course.
This isn't a very messy storming. This is a manageable storm.
No, but first of all, I think that very often in groups, the storming or the meaningful conversations sort of build up, and then they sort of ripen up towards the end of the time together. So I just want to appreciate that you took this difficult role of helping the group storm. And it's really, I think so many things are bubbling up inside, I guess, inside me and inside each and every one of us. And I'm thinking that there's something that I see in groups that I now facilitate, both uninational groups and binational groups, that people will apologize for unsettling the conversation, or people will in the chat, because a lot of these sessions now happen on Zoom, or say, this is so depressing. And if anything, we need to be depressed, we need to be sad, we need to mourn, we need to be compassionate. And I think that there's something, I may be wrong and I may be unfair to some younger generations, but there's something about this need for things to be untriggering. That I find sometimes extremely difficult, not because I want to trigger other people, but because I don't think that there's a way to talk about violence and loss and devastation without it being unsettling. So I wanted to appreciate you and all of us for kind of holding on to that unsettlement. I would say this as a Jewish Israeli. We have to be compassionate to ourselves and to the Palestinians. And also I want to add maybe go back to your point. Our government, the Israeli government, is gaslighting Israeli citizens for the past more than 11 months, a year. But I don't know. Yeah.
At least.
So we have to practice self-compassion because our political leaders are not only not practicing compassion towards us as citizens, they're gaslighting us. They're blaming us for our suffering. And so I think the only way out of this maze or labyrinth of suffering is if we are able to practice compassion for ourselves and for our fellow Palestinians.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I started today naming one generalization that's out there, certainly in my country, and another one, which is that Israelis and Palestinians are not curious, disinterested, uninformed, unaware of the trauma of the other. And another generalization that's out there in this last year is that that there were friendships and there was a peace movement and there were dialogue groups across many divisions and across the Israeli-Palestinian, I don't want to call it necessarily a divide, but right, with these two peoples. And all of that has broken down now, right? That's what I'm reading in the New York Times. Every single thing, every single friendship is broken, every dialogue group has disbanded. One of the gifts of this time for me is seeing that that's just not true. And I don't believe what I read in the newspaper anymore anyway. I don't believe generalizations, but it's still very heartening and exciting to experience all of you. So I want to say what an honor it is. I feel more humility than I did when I came. And I also very specifically want to thank Yochi and Loaay for empathically unsettling us, generatively, empathically unsettling us all this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Loaay Wattad is a Palestinian lecturer, researcher, translator, and editor, and a PhD candidate in the Department of Sociology and the School of Cultural Studies at Tel Aviv University. He is a member of the Maktub Translators Circle, a group that translates works of literature from Arabic to Hebrew. He's the editor-in-chief of the Hakaya, a web platform centered around children's literature. Yochi Fischer is a historian and the deputy director of the Leer Jerusalem Institute, a senior research fellow at the Institute, and head of its Sacredness, Religion, and Secularization cluster. She also leads its Intellectual Journeys program. Her current research focuses largely on religion and secularization. She also does work on memory and history and the connection between research and creativity. This episode was produced by Chris Heagle, Zach Rose, Julie Seipel, Kayla Edwards, Tiffany Champion, Carla Zanoni, and Andrea Prevost. Special thanks this week to Michael Fagelson, Shai Held, Rebecca Plumley, Philip Peters, and the Toussaint Tous, and Lucas Johnson. Our funding partners include the Hearthland Foundation, helping to build a more just, equitable, and connected America, one creative act at a time. The Fetzer Institute, supporting a movement of organizations that are applying spiritual solutions to society's toughest problems. Find them at fetzer.org. Calliopeia Foundation, dedicated to cultivating the connections between ecology, culture, and spirituality, supporting initiatives and organizations that uphold sacred relationships with the living earth. Learn more at calliopeia.org. And the Osprey Foundation, a catalyst for empowered, healthy, and fulfilled lives. On Being is an independent production of the On Being Project based in Minnesota and New York City.